Right, let's get straight into it. Welcome to this Executive Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely critical piece of intelligence from AELION regarding a challenge that is frankly keeping regional directors up at night, the increasingly complex intersection of GCC digital transformation and incredibly strict regulatory compliance. Whether you're a CIO, a compliance officer, or sitting on a governance board, the underlying message here is simple but profound. The way you physically structure your data fundamentally dictates your legal exposure.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this right here is where the conversation abruptly shifts from your standard IT update to a fairly urgent boardroom imperative. Under frameworks like the UAE's Personal Data Protection Law, the PDPL, ignoring compliance in your infrastructure design carries severe personal and, frankly, massive material financial consequences. Treating regulatory compliance as a mere box to tick after the software is already built, well, that is simply no longer a viable option.
To make sense of all this, we're going to move through a very specific framework today. We'll look at the overarching transformation dilemma, navigate the compliance minefield, break down the very real risks of headless architecture, map out a decoupled enterprise solution, and wrap up with distributed governance.
So, let's kick things off with part 1, the transformation dilemma.
Across the GCC right now, we're seeing enterprises absolutely racing toward omni-channel modernization. They are driven by massive, ambitious mandates like Saudi Vision 2030 and the UAE AI strategy. But here is the massive elephant in the room and the core thesis of the AELION report. Legacy monolithic systems are creating massive regulatory exposure. Because they were built for a single-channel era, they often commingle highly governed data, like your health records, with standard everyday operational data. This makes it virtually impossible to cleanly isolate that data for a regulatory audit. Ultimately, your infrastructure topology isn't just an IT headache anymore, it is fundamentally a regulatory question.
Let's move to and see how this builds into our second area, the compliance minefield.
Now, this brings us to a really fascinating, though incredibly tricky structural complexity specific to the UAE. You've got financial free zones like the DIFC and ADGM operating under entirely independent legal frameworks from mainland UAE. If you have an entity registered in the DFSE and you transfer data to a mainland repository, guess what? You've just triggered cross-border data movement compliance. You simply cannot assume that just because servers are physically down the road, they share the same legal jurisdiction.
And it gets even more granular when we look at sector-specific mandates. While the broader UAE PDPL doesn't just slap a blanket data localization rule on everyone, these specific frameworks absolutely mandate it for critical records. The central bank demands localization for core banking records, healthcare is strictly governed by the Health ICT law, and digital government must adhere to TDRA policies. If you operate in any of these spaces, your architecture must be able to actively prove that governed data remains squarely within UAE borders.
Which leads us perfectly into what is arguably a rather dangerous trap, sovereignty washing. You see this all the time. Global cloud providers marketing their local data centers as some sort of impenetrable compliance shield. I assure you, they aren't. Using a local server from a US headquartered provider does not fully protect that data from the US Cloud Act, and more importantly, appointing a big-name external vendor doesn't magically outsource your legal liability. Under the PDPL, if there's a data breach, the buck stops directly with your organization.
Right, moving on to part 3, let's look at the actual engineering side, headless architecture risks. So, to escape the monolith problem, everyone is rushing toward headless architectures. It makes sense, right? But poorly executed migrations are a literal minefield. The briefing outlines 3 catastrophic traps here. First, post-facto governance, trying to design your rules after the content is already published, which completely destroys your audit trails. Second, superficial front-end masking. That's essentially a slick UI hiding a crumbling, non-compliant backend. And the most dangerous of all, ungoverned API ecosystems. Deploying APIs without explicit token scoping means a single app might accidentally have access to mutate any piece of data in your system, creating the absolute perfect environment for a massive breach.
So the crucial point is this: your architecture has to be engineered for the region from day one. Let's take Arabic and English bilingual support as an example. Treating Arabic localization like it's just a quick translation workflow at the end, that is a profound architectural mistake. It inherently requires native UTF-8 database encoding, specific indexing for morphology, and dedicated right-to-left layout engineering just to accommodate horizontal text expansion. You simply cannot fix this after the fact with a clever CSS mirroring trick. This naturally brings us to part 4, where we actually solve this: decoupled enterprise architecture.
To bypass these traps entirely, the AELION report points to a structural solution: a meticulously decoupled, self-hosted enterprise architecture. Before we get into the weeds of the code layer, let's address the massive, strategic question every executive seems to be asking their legal teams right now as they begin this migration. Does the UAE PDPL actually mandate data localization?
Here's your bottom line up front. The PDPL gives us a brilliant, unified standard, but there is no blanket localization mandate across the board. It is your sector-specific regulations that dictate your specific mandates. Therefore, you absolutely must design your data schemas to instantly categorize and isolate data based on those exact rules.
And this brilliantly illustrates how a modern, decoupled architecture handles those complex regional requirements. Look at how this JSON resource schema is built. Instead of firing off entirely separate database requests for English and Arabic text, which frankly causes horrific API latency, this structure nests both languages right inside a single document. By pulling both payloads at the exact same time, in parallel, you completely eliminate that sequential API lag. It's elegant and it's incredibly fast. On top of that, running a self-hosted decoupled system unlocks highly granular, role-based access control. We are talking leagues beyond your basic admin or editor toggles here. By using platforms with explicit token scoping, you enforce least privilege access controls right down to the specific operation, the exact content type, and even contextual factors like where the user is geographically sitting. For compliance administrators needing to run retrospective audits, this level of granular control is an absolute game changer.
Finally, let's zoom out for part 5, the distributed governance operational model.
We've sorted the technical deployment, but how on earth do you actually maintain that standard at scale? Well, AELION proposes what they call the 3-node governance model. It's a rather clever blueprint that deliberately allocates responsibilities to balance your costs, your engineering talent, and your strict legal oversight. Node 1 is strategic governance, placed in a jurisdiction like London for robust legal management. Node 2 is market alignment, positioned right there in Dubai to keep you perfectly in step with GCC clients and local regulators. And finally, Node 3 is your engineering execution, situated in a tech hub like Casablanca, handling the complex database optimization and bilingual engineering. By structuring both your technology and your daily operations to respect the very real, very strict regional regulations, you essentially bulletproof your enterprise against liability. Which leaves us with one incredibly provocative final thought to consider. If your infrastructure were audited tomorrow morning, could it flawlessly trace your data lineage and instantly isolate your governed data locally? If your answer is anything less than a 100% definitive yes, well, it's probably time to seek some qualified advisory before you try to scale any further. Thank you so much for joining this explainer.